Thank you for joining us. As Natalie mentioned, I'm Marla Fishman, and I'm one of the organizers of the event. And we're happy to have everyone on the call. We're very excited and looking forward to hearing from our speakers. And the topic they're going to be covering, as you know, it's about the design sprint, which is this innovative approach to very quickly design solutions to complex problems. And we're going to get to do a walkthrough of the process. So I'm looking forward to that. You've met Natalie, but Natalie Liakova, I want to introduce her as the organizer of the Work Search Buddy Network, which is hosting this event. And this network was established by Natalie to support both individuals seeking their next job role and working professionals. And so we have regular events where people are able to come together, learn and practice new skills, and really establish these meaningful connections, on a regular basis. And we also are a meetup group, and we'll share a link in the chat if you're interested in learning more about that. So we're about to get into the program, but before we do, I just want to share a few quick housekeeping and logistics notes. So kind of the structure of how this is going to work is the first part of the program is our presenters are going to be talking about the design sprint. We're going to walk through the process. And then in the last part, probably the last 15, 20 minutes, we will take questions and comments from all of you. So as we're going through it, if you could just note your question or enter it in the chat, and we'll be sure to get to it. So I believe everyone's mics have been muted. So please keep your mics muted during the presentation, and then obviously unmute them when we get to the end if you have questions. And this is an opportunity for networking. So we really, really encourage everyone to put your information in the chat with your LinkedIn URL and connect with each other. And we're also going to be providing the LinkedIn URLs for our speakers and for Natalie and me. So we will remind you at the end, but please remember to download the chat. So we're going to be sharing links to resources that we mentioned, as well as everyone's LinkedIn URLs. So remember to download the chat at the end. We'll remind you, and if you don't know how to do it, don't worry, we will explain that. So let's get started and meet our speakers. Arman Bimatov is co-founder and chief product officer of TravelWits. So he leads products that utilize AI to help travelers find door-to-door trips, so flight, hotel, bus, train, parking, everything, that are fully optimized around user preferences, corporate policies, and more. And he's going to share practical insights based on his experience facilitating a design sprint for his company. And Arman will be interviewed by Delphine Venitucci, who is a marketing and strategy leader with over 12 years of experience boosting performance of products, brands, and firms. And Delphine is a consultant and startup advisor who is a passionate problem solver and turnaround specialist. And she's recently started her own business specializing in accessories for disabled people, including wheelchair wheel covers. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you, Delphine. And
thank you. Thank you, Marla, for this introduction.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to see all these very nice faces. And I'm happy to share some information to start with about the difference between design thinking and design sprints, because some of you may have heard about design thinking because it's a very current problem-solving approach within many firms, either large corporations or very small startups. And design thinking is about bringing innovation and compelling differentiated added value to cross-functional problems. And it helps address cross-functional challenges with a very strategic approach, because these challenges are generally impacting the whole value chain within a company and or any organization. So these challenges are, for example, sustainability, inclusivity, and they are the idea is to have a very cross-functional approach, which implies the whole firm at every level. So design thinking helps address but not solve problems. I think that's a very important thing to stress here. And it's an ongoing process. It is not time limited. So design sprint is rooted in the same core ideas of innovation, creativity, diverse thinking as design thinking, but it's very focused, and it focuses on solving a problem, in general, developing a product or new features of a product, and it's very clearly defined. And design sprint is totally time limited, and it's generally very short, from 3 to 5 days. Design sprint is particularly effective for developing new products, as I've just said, and challenges with very strong quantitative impact, I would say, such as user engagement or customer engagement. So Arman is going to tell us about his experience, his hands-on experience within his startup firm. And so Arman, you recently ran a design sprint. I think that was in August.
Right.
I know you want to keep a very hands-on approach, so the theoretical part can be addressed through different videos, etc. You will share some information in the chat later during this this workshop. So can you tell us about the initial challenge you wanted to solve?
Right. Yeah. So everything you said is like spot on the difference between the design thinking and the design sprint. I myself am a very pragmatic person, very practical, and don't have a lot of times I don't have patience for more you know big things, big ideas, such as design thinking. Every time I used to read about it, I would kind of be like, okay, that's too much for me. And then I stumbled upon this concept of design sprint. And as I mentioned, as Marla mentioned, I'm a chief product officer. So my job is to basically take products from whatever the stakeholders said, some ideas, to an actual functional product that converts into certain metrics, users, customers, revenue, potentially. I mean, we are a startup, so that's hopefully to come. And the as a product person, I have to, a self-taught product person, I have an engineering background. I have to often kind of wear a bunch of different hats. So I end up dabbling a little bit in kind of here, a little bit here, jack of all trades, master of none. So I was occasionally I read a bunch of resources on like the latest cloud, how to use cloud infrastructure. Then the next morning I'll be reading a bunch about latest design trends, and then the next morning I'll be looking at CSS frameworks to use for our next project. So my job is very diverse, which I love about that. But again, it doesn't give me that enough time to kind of dive into those bigger concepts like design thinking. So when I saw this article about design sprint, which I saw in via this Chrome extension called Muesli, it was just kind of popped up and kept popping up on my screen. So I've decided to kind of dig into it a little bit more, and started watching some YouTube videos, which is always, to me, the best medium for learning, because it's less dry than reading, and started Googling a bit more, kind of, okay, the reason it became interesting to me is because we were just about to start a new project at our startup, which basically, some context around that is, we're a travel startup, and this is an interesting year to be in a travel startup. So we actually closed a funding round right before, maybe a month before COVID-19 hit, or maybe like a few weeks, which was very, very lucky for us. And then we were kind of working on the product, and then all of a sudden we realized that we need to kind of address the situation, address the crisis. And we started looking into opportunities along with our partners, and stumbled upon an interesting challenge opportunity. Um, and at that point, it was evident that we're going to proceed with, developing a new product. And I realized, okay, how can I do this right? Um, and that's kind of what the challenge was in my head. Someone asked what our site is. It's travelwits.com, so you guys can check it out. But basically, what kind of popped up into my head is kind of this. I did this like fear setting exercise,
Mhm.
which is basically like, okay, we're starting a new product, we're starting a new project. What am I afraid of? Like, that's going to go wrong. And I started visualizing all the things that are going to go wrong with the project, in 6 months. And I realized one of the biggest worries I had, fears for the project, is that we're going to spend all this time on, building a solution without potentially, really, really testing the hypotheses, the problems we're solving and things like that. And we're just going to put it out there and, build it and they will come. That never works, pretty much. And that was my biggest fear. And I realized that, that's something that kind of motivated me a lot. So, it's a kind of a good example of sometimes um, giving into your emotions, and try to, use them for the best. And then at that time, I started reading about the design sprint and realized that that's something that's a really practical, very kind of straightforward approach to a product kickoff. So that kind of was the challenge, in many words. um, does that answer your question?
Yes, so thank you. What I find interesting here is that you had this very particular context of startup within the COVID situation, which hits at a very strategic moment for you.
Right.
And that was also very important because you were, well, you wanted to adapt, but you also were afraid of not being successful in the end. And I think that one of the strengths of design thinking and design sprints are the opportunity to test hypotheses, because it has to be cheap financially and cheap in terms of timing, because time is also money, obviously. So
Right.
that's a very important point, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
And so once you decided to launch a design sprint workshop, what did you do? What did you start with? How did you prepare that?
Right. So the first thing I did was kind of, again, just perusing the internet, Googling, watching a bunch of YouTube videos. There's some resources that I think we're putting together that we can send out to everyone after the call.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the resources was, for me, was a YouTube channel called A J and Smith, or something.
Smart.
Smart, right? And I basically probably spent, hours and hours, days and days watching the YouTube videos, and I would often rewatch the same video like multiple times to understand, really in depth, the design sprint, the benefits. And at some point, I kind of spent enough time on it, and I realized that, okay, I definitely want to do this. Um, the next step was convincing the team. And
Mm-hmm.
the complexity here is, selling it to our team, but also we have a partner firm that we're, in a partnership with, um, and then also selling it to them. And basically, and this, it's also a little bit about trust. So it depends on how much trust there is within the company and in the partnership. So obviously, and we have a great trust on our team as well as with our partners, which means they'll trust you a little bit more, so you don't have to work as hard to sell something. But I did kind of spend a lot of time putting together again, kind of I decided to put together a slide deck. I think it was maybe 5 minutes, that I where I addressed all the main points, like, okay, what is a design sprint? Um, then what problems does it solve? But not just generally, but specifically for us. So I kind of I went back in our experiences with our previous projects. Luckily, we have things to look on in the past, and basically say, hey, remember this happened? So this is a problem for us, that we want to make sure this doesn't happen again, and design sprint can help us with that, because and then I would give him some of the benefits of the design sprint. Again, I went over the biggest fears of I think emotion, and these sometimes fears and negative emotions can really help you sell something, because it's kind of like life insurance. You're selling life insurance. It's kind of like that. um I think some of the biggest selling points for me was that I think worked for the team, is that some of the biggest fears are, for example, focusing on, as engineers, we're all tend to focus on solutions rather than problems, right? It's very easy to kind of have this sandcastle in your head, and you're thinking on that thing, without really thinking about, or empathizing with the users, which is a
Mm,
design thinking concept. um Also, the other thing that takes a lot of time is validating a problem, as well as a solution, right? So it takes a really long time to do that, usually, typically. And design sprint is something that can help you cut down that time it takes to validate whether you do really understand the problem and the user, down to a much shorter period of time. Design sprint says it's a week. In my experience, it probably will take longer than that. But I mean, these are some of the biggest things, as well as things like over engineering, right? That's there's many other things I could go into. um and the other thing is, was important in that selling 5 minutes of selling was, okay, here's how we're going to do this, giving us very specific steps, plan, saying, okay, it's going to be on these dates. We'll have everyone online from this time to that time. We'll use Zoom. Everything's going to be recorded. We'll use this and that for user testing. So kind of um, answering a bunch of questions, and making it super easy to just say, all right, let's try it out, is very, I think, really kind of benefited, and I was able to sell it to the team like that.
right. And can you just, sorry, can you just mention the profiles you had on the team? Was that the whole company? Did you just imply people who had something to do with product development?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So it's really important who's on the design sprint, because it's a design sprint is basically a few days where the set of people that you choose are going to kind of spend together for those days. So you want to make sure it's not it's the right people. They're important enough that their opinions matter, and if they say something, um, it will go. So it's not like you talk to someone and then you try to implement that, and then the higher ups say no. So you want to make sure that these people are important, um, and also you want to make sure that it's a diverse set of people that can contribute to the knowledge about the problem, and the solution, and the space, competitive space, and the user, and the technology concerns. So in our case, on our side, it was me and the two of my other co-founders, who are both technical co-founders, including our CEO. And then we also had our lead of business development on our team. So that was like four. And then on their side, we had basically, two of their, I believe, VPs of their company on the partner side, and then two kind of more like hands-on people who are actually potential users of the product whose problems we're trying to solve. So it was about 8 people, which is a little bit higher than the recommended. The recommended, I think, is like 5 to 7 people or 4 to 7 people, but it kind of was necessary. We deemed it necessary.
But I think it's important as well that you had this double vision with stakeholders who are also potential users, as you've just said. And since it's so important to have not only customer-centric approach, but really customer empathy. That's a strong notion concept in that design sprint thing. So I think it's really important, and especially with the, I guess this is a notion we'll be able to address during the demonstration that you're going to show and share with us. But alignment is a great
Right.
is the core idea of the workshop. Alignment for the strategic process.
And one thing I want to add to the team point is also, I haven't actually seen any recommendations as to whether you want to have actual customers on the design sprint or not, because that's an arguable point, because on one hand they bring the that's the first hand source, right? It's a primary source of data right there, where they can advocate for themselves. You don't need anyone representing them. On the other hand, you're introducing a bit of a danger of like boxing yourself in that in the day-to-day, because the users often kind of, it's like, that famous saying that Ford was saying, if he asked what the customers wanted, they would say faster horses. So he would never come up with a car. So it's kind of like that, right? So you want to
exactly
think about very critically whether you do want customers, users on the design sprint or not, because you do end up at the end of the whole thing, as the last day of the design sprint, you end up actually testing it with real users. So that's a factor to think about.
Yes, I think that you need some very precise data before starting the design sprint event. So you can get some customer data before the actual workshop, or in the end when you're actually testing the hypothesis, but maybe not during the whole process. That
Right.
might a bit get messy, I think, at this point.
Right. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that we've got quite a whole idea of what a design sprint is, and now we're going to dive more into the practical part of this workshop, and you'll guide us through a few exercises that you led your team into.
Right.
So we'll have a hands-on part.
Okay. Should I share my screen?
Yes, please.
All right. Let's see if I can share the right thing here. All right. Can you see Miro? All right, cool. So before I dive into the whole thing, I'll spend just one quick second. I want to show you this website called Design Sprint Kit with Google.com. This is, I think this is also something we're going to send out to everyone. This is one of my main sources of when I was preparing for the design sprint. Just FYI, for me, I think the recommendation is like spend 2 days on preparing for a design sprint. For me, it probably took like 30 hours, I think, or something like that. So and also because I tend to overanalyze everything. Again, the fear setting. I'm like, what's gonna go wrong at every minute of the whole session. So this is the main resource I used. I went to resources, and one of the things I used was tools and templates. And if you go down to 3-day product design sprint, this is what I was looking at pretty much the whole time and referring to. It's like a document that gives you an idea of what's going to happen every day in very good detail. That's something that's also you can look at via YouTube videos, but this one gives a little bit more context, I think, which is helpful. Besides that, if you do have time, also check out, they have actually a ton of different tools and exercises here for other than design sprints. So depending on the scenario that you're facing, whether it's in your work or personal life, maybe it's an important life decision, you can actually look at a bunch of these exercises, and they have what they call recipes. So design sprint is basically like a recipe. So definitely check that out. We don't have time for this right now. So I'll open this, and I will actually go back to the Miro board for now, and then every now and then I'll come here and kind of explain what's going on. All right, so first thing I'm gonna do right now is, let's pretend that we have a scenario in our hands, and we're trying to basically solve a challenge all together. We're a team of excellent designers and thinkers and business leaders, and we're trying to solve a challenge. So we're gonna go and create a new board. I use Mural.com. There's also, I think, Mural. Some people use. Miro is just something I saw in a YouTube video, and I just kind of used it. Then basically there's a bunch of different templates. So in this case, I ended up using the virtual 4-day design sprint. So let's just start with that. So it's really nice because it basically just generates the whole thing for you day by day, whenever it comes up. Here it is. As you can see, it's quite a lot of stuff, but it actually just says start here. So let's go and do that. Basically, let me actually, one thing that I'm going to be using is the timer feature, so that we can make sure that to stay on track. I'm going to put 1 minute, and we're going to go over the introduction here real quick. So the first thing when we started the design sprint with the partners, with the whole team that was on the design sprint, 8 people, the first thing that we did was go over kind of how to use the tool. So everyone, I sent everyone a link, invited everyone, and it was it was an interesting half an hour. People were clicking, dragging things off the screen. This is definitely something you have to think about a lot, is the kind of technical capabilities of your team that are going to be in design sprint, and think about contingencies. What happens if someone drags something off the screen or deletes something? What happens if someone can't add something to the screen? You have to think through all of these situations, and I can't stress enough of that. All right, so the other thing I want to mention is one of the this is actually a really great tool, a quick exercise where you ask all the participants to add like an image of their favorite vacation spot, and then people download pictures from the internet, Google, and then just paste them here. And then I think we also added a step where people voted for these destinations. I'm not going to spend any more time on this. Now, real quick, the overview. So let's see here. Let's spend 2 minutes on that. And the timer, as you see, I'm using the timer here. The timer was super critical. If you're a minute off, the whole thing's off. But this is something that I actually spent hours and hours planning and kind of modifying the exercises, the duration of exercises. I had a running list, on a piece of paper, where I wrote down at which minute I should start what. Um, and having breaks is super important, because those breaks, for everyone, they can go to the bathroom or whatever. For you, you use those breaks to see where you messed up, what needs to be moved, what needs to be changed in terms of timing, and even then it's still you run over. So it's really important. Obviously we did the whole thing virtually over Zoom, and this board that I'm showing you. So real quick, basically, the design sprint is, and this is how I actually went through the design sprint with everyone else on the team. I basically just went through these slides, and I told everyone that, you'll understand everything as we go through it. You don't really need to understand everything before you go through the process, which is helpful. I did send everyone a quick video. So, I mean, basically the main concept is, you kind of apply that design thinking approach, and you go through, for example, this one is a 4-day version of the design sprint. We did the whole thing in about 3 days, so I rearranged some stuff. But basically, you start by Monday. You map the problem. You understand, okay, what is the problem? What is the challenge? Who are the users? What is the current process looks like? Like, let's say if it's a product development, then what does the current product user flow look like? And you want to actually draw it out on the board, so we'll do that. Then you'll sketch some potential solutions, where you say, what if we have the product looks like this, and there's literal pencil sketches. And then on Tuesday, you vote for sketches, and you say, okay, this, everyone on the team votes, and they say, I like this one because it solves the problem. I don't like this one because it doesn't solve the problem. And then you prototype the whole thing with, clickable prototypes, or, something that you can actually put in front of the users. And then the last day of the sprint, you test the whole thing with the users, and, try to learn from that. Other than that, just going to kind of jump in here. For the sake of this exercise, for this, session here, I'll just go with something that my wife and I are going through right now, is real estate. So, something that I thought of as could be our challenge here today is, let's say, buying, or finding the right house for, housemates, or, couples, partners, etc. Can be really frustrating. uh, because of the preferences. So everything's misspelled, which is fine. And then you kind of dive into it a little bit more detail, and say, what problems are you trying to solve more specifically. We don't have time for that. And then the other is outcomes. What are you trying to get out of the design sprint? And this is really important to kind of get everyone on the same page, because then you have a discussion and you say, no, I don't think that's the outcome we want. And then, that's the discussion is what's really important in the whole process. It doesn't even matter as much what actually comes out here, which is kind of paradoxical a little bit. But let's say, one of the outcomes is we want to basically eliminate frustration, or if you want to make it more measurable, you can say, cut the number of houses that you look at in half, or something like that, since you don't want to be spending your time on houses that don't match anyone's preferences, or something like that. again, I don't know anything about this. I just went through the whole process for the first time in my life. And it was definitely a pain point I can relate to.
May I just jump in for 1 second, Arman?
Mhm.
I'm browsing the chat just to be sure not to forget anything. And
Sure.
even if we'll answer questions in the end, I saw something which might be interesting to address before the end, because someone is asking users, meaning who exactly. So users are the can be different people. Users here can be the people who are engaged in the design sprint event, but if we're talking final users, that's obviously customers or the couple who's trying to buy a house. So
Right. So in this case, if we look at the challenge definition, what we're trying to do is we try to solve the pain point of finding the right house, considering the preferences of couples, partners, housemates, and with in this case the users would be the housemates that we're targeting. So if it is at the end of the day, if it's an app or a website, the target customers, target I shouldn't say customers, but target users would be the housemates in our case. Yeah. So in their case,
I'm sorry.
yeah,
Can
go
I
ahead.
ask one quick question?
Mhm.
So with the users, if people within your company are not the actual users, how do you accurately identify the problem that you're trying
Right.
to solve for the users? Have you done work beforehand to gather data
Right. So
on
this
that?
exercise right here is actually addresses exactly that point. So basically, this is where you still kind of in the understand phase. So what you do is this is where design sprint. Um, uh, this is where you should have done some homework before the design sprint. By this point, you should have in this case, in this exercise, which is called expert talks. There's also another word for it is lightning talks. This is where you basically run like 7-minute lightning talks. Sometimes it's also can be structured as an interview, where participants of the design sprint ask the different experts on the team. But basically, you want to make sure during that time, during the session, which here is given 45 minutes, you have different experts talking about the different aspects that are important or relevant to this challenge. And some examples of that are actually really well described in, let's see, lightning talks. So in this design sprint kit with google.com, that resource that I was showing you before, they really go into understanding what should the lightning talks be about. And again, those lightning talks should be done beforehand, so some homework should be done, whether it's user research, competitive analysis, or whatever. But usually, they recommend each talk be 10 minutes, talk about the project vision, overall business goals, um, you know, again, some of the user research findings. So if you schedule the design sprint in 3 weeks from now, then you want to spend the next 3 weeks going in and spending the time to find out as much as possible about the user. In our case, we would interview a ton of different housemates, whoever fits the profile. Competitor audit. At this point, we would look at Zillow, rent.com. You would look at. I'm not familiar with the space enough, so I'm not gonna keep going here. But technology considerations is also something that you could look at and say, hey, the costs of cloud are really um, you know um, attractive these days, or something like that. We can get startup credits for the next 3 years or something like that. So maybe that's something that can come into play at some point. um, let's go back to here. So what's really important during that time is that everyone on the team who's listening to those expert talks and lightning talks, to the experts is writing down notes. And the format of note taking is actually very interesting and very unique, which is basically they call it "How might we?" So if we look at the example here, let's say the expert says, in our case, the expert says we went out there, talked to a bunch of housemates, and they all said, we hate the how we have to go to a bunch of houses that none of us like. It's kind of like both are compromising and none of them are winning. So then, as a participant, I would say, how might we make it easy to, or how might we reduce the number of houses housemates have to look at that don't match anyone's preferences, right? Something like that. And this is just as an example. So during that time, each participant, they have an area here in this board. They actually go ahead and say, write down how might we, and blah, blah, blah. And then, so at the end of the lightning talks, you'll have a really nice, big collection of these how might we notes. The beauty of that is that it's not just random notes. It's notes that can be translated into pain points. So if there's some notes that you want to take that you can't really phrase it as a problem, a pain point, as a how might we or an opportunity, then you probably want to just write it down in a notebook somewhere else, outside of this board. Because the whole point of this design sprint exercise is kind of going from, they often show in these diagrams, from kind of diverging, kind of creating a set of potential problems. And then by the end of the sprint, diverging and really coming down on a solution or a potential solution on a potential problem that you think is worth solving. Any questions before I move on? No. So then the other thing that happens after that is people vote for the how might we's. So all the how might we's, all the notes that we took throughout the design sprint actually go from here down to here. And this is where, everyone who's on the team will take these red stickies and put them on the how might we's that they like the most, or by like, I mean, think that are important and worth solving. And then you end up with a very great visual of, hey, these are all our problems. These are really important ones. And this is the most important one. And then you probably want to take the most important one and focus on that for the design sprint, or probably take 3 ones, I think. Yep. Then something that I'm not going to go into detail here because we don't have too much time is you also want to make sure that you kind of drill down on the long-term goal. And this is more for alignment on the team and also for informing all of your future steps. Because, one person might say, our long-term goal is to dominate to be the leader in real estate space or something like that. Another person might write, want to be the leading inspiration, curation, Chrome extension or something like that. Then, all of those things, I'm sorry, all of those things come to surface, and it's really clear that you might not actually have a clear understanding among the whole team. And this is a great opportunity for people to start discussing and trying to get everyone on the same page as to what is it really that we're trying to do here in the next 2 years, which is really important. And then this one, sprint questions. This is, to me, it was the most difficult one to get right. I definitely, next time we do the design sprint, I'm definitely going to give it a little bit more thought. Sprint questions is basically, you basically do the same thing, that you did with long-term goals, and you try to understand and discuss with the team. Everyone writes down the key questions that need to be answered during the few days that you have during the design sprint. And basically, those questions need to be such that they're critical to your success. So, if you say, for example, a potential hypothesis, basically here's a good way to phrase it. What could stop us from reaching our long-term goal? So one hypothesis would be that you could write here is, the like an example of bad sprint question would be like, the real estate cost will go up by 200% or something like that. So, it's something is outside of your control, and definitely you can't, de-risk it during the design sprint. But maybe a good one, or an okay one, would be, housemates, for example, mind, looking at houses that they're not interested in. Maybe it's just fun for them, right? So that's definitely, we can't assume that that's a problem until we verify that, right? Like, for me, for example, I would look at houses even if I knew that we wouldn't get them, just because window shopping, so that would be like an example of a sprint question that you might want to validate, for example. Did you have something, Delphine?
Oh, no, I wanted to suggest, for example, what if someone loses their jobs during the house search? That might be another.
Right. Yeah. So that's a sprint question that we could add here. Yeah. And again, you end up voting on them. And then, by the way, I forgot to mention is you actually want to make sure that before the design sprint starts, you appoint what's called a decider. So one of the people on the team is going to make the decisions. So that they're going to get the green dots, which hold all the power. And basically what that means is, they serve as tiebreakers. They also serve as kind of the no nonsense person. So what we had happen actually is, a bunch of people voted on something that was very ambiguous, like an ambiguous sprint question, or very high level. We're going to be the best or something like that. Or like, let's say a long-term goal. It was like, we're going to be the best travel website in the world or something, just as an example. And then the decider said, hey, I'm not actually comfortable voting for something that everyone voted for here, which is this really ambiguous high-level statement that is just not useful. And that prompted a discussion, and we all agreed. So he was kind of like like a stopper in the whole thing. He like was able to stop the whole thing from moving on to the next step. And due to that, we were able to correct the mistake, and we came up with more specific statements, and then re-voted again. And that's also something that you have to account for next time you plan for a design sprint, because that's something that can derail the timing. So I know we have about 5 minutes here, so I'm not going to go into. We're basically close to the end. Something, the next exercise after this is actually understanding the map. We actually arranged it so that we did the map first. But basically what it is you try to understand who are the actors in the system, in this flow. So you might have a real estate agent, a sales agent. You might have the buyer's agent, or seller's agent. There's so many different agents. And then you might have the inspector, inspection or something like that. I'm not sure if they're relevant in this case. And then you have the buyer and the seller themselves. And then the stages, usually recommended ones are, you kind of go through, discover. So how do you discover a solution usually? And you might say, buyer goes to, goes to Zillow.com and looks through a bunch of properties and talks to their wife, or partner. Then discover. And the second step is learn. How do you learn more? So, and this could be they inquire, via Zillow, with the owner, or maybe they call their agent and say, hey, can you, find out more about this property? I really liked it. And then stage 3 could be, um, usually I've seen design sprints do something like this: use, discover, learn, use. But it's usually about a product. So in this case, they might, go and look at the house, for example. That would be a sticky we would put here. And then the end goal might be, again, for the lack of time, might say to look at less houses. And this is really something you spend only a few minutes on. Well, in this case, it says 45 minutes, but it's just to get everyone on the same page in terms of understanding how it works currently. What's the current process? Then what we did is we actually, after we went through all of that, we didn't want to run the whole thing for too long. So we gave people, this was a Wednesday. So at the end of the Wednesday, we were basically here. And I asked everyone and sent everyone instructions as homework, basically the lightning demos exercise and sketching. And this is where the lightning demos is basically, it's not worth spending too much time explaining. It's basically examples of user interfaces around the web that might be relevant or good for inspiration. And this is to inform your next step, which is sketching. And that might be, for example, Zillow.com. So people would actually upload their screenshots and paste them here for everyone to look at and to get inspired, basically. And this was hugely useful. So this is a really important step. I would definitely embrace that. And then the second piece of homework is the sketching. And this is where everyone, no matter how bad their drawing skills, and we had some people who just submitted basically text that says a button here, heading here, this is, this feature here, that feature here. No matter how abstract the sketch might be, or not abstract, there's still value in it because you get into their head of someone else, which is really great. But here's some examples of sketches that you might see. And then the last thing, and I know I'm kind of speeding through it, I hope we can answer some questions after that. The last thing you do is you actually vote on the sketches. So everyone pastes their sketches here with some sticky notes that explain what they all mean. Here's step 1. You go on this app, you download this app, you press on this button, you type in your preferences, then maybe you give the phone to your housemate, they type in their preferences, then there's this algorithm that runs a quick search and match and spits out these houses that are perfect match or something like that. So that could be, for example, an example of a sketch here. And then at this point, basically everyone votes on the sketch and decides on how it's going to be tested. So basically you say, okay, we're going to have these screens here. These are the screens that we want to design. Again, I know I spent too much time talking about it in the beginning, but basically you take these steps, you understand you kind of sketch out really quickly what it's going to look like, after you've kind of voted for the sketch, and the steps that you want to take to test it. So here you might have like all the screens that you want to design out. Then you give it to the designers. They design the whole thing out. That was, for us, it was on the second half of the second day, Thursday. We basically just went down and designed the whole thing in Figma. And then the last day, Friday, for us, we actually we finalized the prototype, made it clickable, so you can click on things, so we could test it with the user, arranged user sessions, testing sessions, and tested it with the users. So we gave them the control, asked them to click around talk about their thoughts, think aloud protocol. This is something you can also look up videos on how to do that. um, and it's really important that you record the findings in a measurable way that are easy to communicate. So here, for example, you might go over features, components that you want to test, and then use stickies to record, okay, here's the um, a good, they liked that, they really got the point of typing in all their preferences, and then they took the time. So that would be like a green sticky. And they might say, um, during the testing, we saw that the users, you know, didn't even, they just skipped the preferences section. That would be a red sticky. And then it'd be really easy to see how well you validated the solution. So I know we're out of time on my
Right.
part. But that's kind of the last step. And then at that point, you kind of communicate it to the team and say, here's the findings, here are the next steps.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for guiding us through this process.
Yeah.
Well, it's a lot of explanations, obviously, to need it. So, I think it's important to underline too that this process is actually very fun, and of course, it creates alignment in terms of strategy for a company, but it also creates alignment in terms of well, it's like almost a team building activity. And especially for startup, that's really interesting to build a vision together. So I think it's a
Yeah.
great tool for that. And that guide that leads us to the benefits of design spring. I think that's this alignment is one of them, but maybe you want to share a few others before we go to questions and answers.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, the biggest benefit by far is that, basically amazed the whole team, everyone involved. We had a solution. We went from just like a vague idea of a problem to a solution, an actual clickable solution, an actual UI in a matter of 3 days. That was, the huge key selling point after the fact. And I can't like discount that enough. And that it also, as a result, it motivates the whole team, because now you have something tangible. Now it's not no longer kind of up in the air. It's right here. You can touch it, you can feel it, and now you can iterate on it. That's a great, great benefit. It's definitely worth taking those 3 days to do that. And then the other thing is alignment across the team. I think that's a huge thing. Everyone understands. Everyone's on the same page. There's not going to be any surprises. If you keep kind of communicating after the design sprint, I think those are the big benefits.
Right. Maybe a few lessons learned.
Oh, for sure. Lots. I could probably like do another one of these talks about lessons learned, but I would say definitely need, next time I'll take more time to prepare for the design sprint. Last time I spent maybe 30 hours. Next time I'll maybe spend, 50, 60 hours preparing for the design sprint, including also actually learning about the users a little bit more, because we've discovered during design sprint that there were some things that we had assumptions about that were incorrect, that we validated either through the design sprint, talking to the members on the team, or during the validation with the customer. So obviously that's a huge perk of the design sprint, but preferably we would have found out that before via doing some user research. But again, it's always going to be like that. There's always going to be some things that you find out in the design sprint, and that's the whole point. And then I'll say two more lessons learned. One is, you have to always be flexible, have contingencies. Stuff's going to go wrong. Technology, people are going to be late. People are going to go over. People are going to have like long discussions about stuff. I always run longer than I want to. And the second thing is next time I'll definitely look into more prototyping solutions. For example, specifically something I wanted to look at was no code or low code platforms. For example, Bubble IO. It's something that allows you to create tools, like basically without coding, so that you can create a prototype without ever writing a single line of code. And that could be used for prototyping. That's definitely something I want to try next time.
Okay, so now you're going to jump into design thinking because that's an ongoing process, and I think you're already started it.
Right. In terms of next steps, that was actually a pretty. It's kind of like jumping into cold water because now it's like you're excited, you have the momentum, and then you're like, whoa, wait, now you're on your own and back to the routine, and it's kind of like feels dangerous to kind of uh, go back to the normal ways, and you kind of don't want to. So I started doing a bunch of research, and there's lots of different advice out there about what to do next. But we basically ended up, kind of um, realizing that we wanted to do a little bit more iterations with the user, not necessarily design sprint, but iterating over the prototype, kind of getting it to a point where we can actually 100% validate the problem as well as the solution. That was the main next step. And after that, we kind of went into the agile sprints.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Arman, for sharing this experience. That's really interesting because we started by explaining that it's something we can use within the company. And the example you chose was for, well, a personal question. And that's important because it shows that design sprint can also address any kind of question. So I
Right.
think that will be one of the conclusions.
One lesson learned I forgot to mention, which is hugely important for me, is it's really hard to be a design sprint facilitator as well as a participant. So I was both, because I would get up and like 5 a.m. and get all these submissions of like sketches and lightning demos, and I still haven't done my own. And you have to do both the facilitator work as well as participate in discussions. So it can kind of chip away a little bit at your participating abilities. Where you need to be contributing to the how might we's, to the sprint questions. You need to be thinking critically about everything everyone says, but at the same time you need to be facilitating. So
Mm,
if you can, have a facilitator who's not,
mm,
uh, who wouldn't be an important contributor to the design sprint, but it's probably hard to do that. I actually found some quotes, talked to some design agencies, and and I was like, hey, do you guys do facilitation? And they were like, yeah, here, $10,000 or something like
yes.
that. It would be expensive. That's why I had to wear two hats.
Yes, maybe the idea would be to find someone within the company, and that might ease the process because, as you said, well, the Google is provide services of design sprint, but I guess that it's about, well, hundreds of thousands of dollars each time. So, but you can,
Yeah.
if participants to this webinar are interested, you can read very interesting user cases from Google, which might inspire you either to build a design sprint event or to have a more precise idea of all the questions that you can address through design sprint. So
Right.
thank you for that. Yes, you wanted to add something.
Sorry. Yeah. The reason I actually agreed to do the whole thing, the talk on the design sprint, is when I was preparing for the design sprint, I couldn't find enough information on the practical part, like who's done it. What was your personal experience? I found some Reddit posts where people on Reddit were posting kind of how they did it, and I found some case studies as well. But those are usually very well polished, and very high level. So definitely I saw that there was a huge gap in that like practical experience. So I wanted to contribute to that.
Well, thank you for doing that. And I think that now we can I saw a few questions in the chat, so Marla might want to recap everything, and I'll try to.
Great. Thank you guys so much. This was so interesting, and I feel like we could even spend way more time digging into this. There's just so much to it. I'm just going to make a note that I just entered a link to a survey that we really encourage everyone who attended to before. This is just before we get into Q&A, to complete the survey, because it really helps us know and get ideas for things going forward. So I just entered the link into the chat. I mentioned as a reminder to download the chat for anyone who does not know how to do that. And then we will go into questions. When you click on the chat, there are 3 dots. You'll see file and then 3 dots. You simply click on the 3 dots and then save chat, and then you can open it up in the folder. So Natalie, did we have questions in the chat from people?
Yeah, a couple. And I wanted to first maybe like share my own impression from what I'm hearing. Is it true, Arman? We do have some people on the call here who are project managers, program managers, IT leadership, holding IT leadership positions. So it seems to me like leading this exercise requires to really taking a strong lead. Otherwise, you won't be able to go through it really. So it does require strong leadership skills, organizational skills, and technical skills. Is it true? What do you think?
Um, I would say, leadership organization is true. Technical, probably not so much. I mean, other than knowing how to use the tools, Zoom and Miro. One thing that, um, and I think also just probably knowing the team well, and compensating for your own weaknesses, using the available resources. So for example, if you're not as technically strong, then maybe you can use someone else on the team who knows how to use Zoom very well, and Miro, and who can teach people how to use Miro.com very well, without wasting time. So maybe that would be my advice, is like, whatever your weaknesses are, you want to make sure that you
Compensated
compensate for them. Yeah,
with
yeah.
yeah. Another observation is you also touched upon it. It's difficult to wear 2 hats simultaneously, to be both the participant and organizer or facilitator of the event. How about the perspective of whether you are internal to the context of the problem you're trying to solve, or you are external to the context, like a consultant?
Mhm.
Is there a difference? Which would be preferred?
Um, I don't know, because we only did it one way. But I know that agencies come in, and uh, from what I've heard, and they actually do spend. They agencies themselves usually try to spend maybe some time before the design sprint, trying to get into the context, talking to the users, doing some of the research that informs the expert talks during the design sprint. And they actually are responsible for, facilitators are responsible for filling out the board as much as they can, so that you don't start
With their
fresh.
own assumptions, kind of, right?
Right, from the research they've done, themselves. And this is something I had to do as well. But they would have to still do that work to get into the context, most likely. And that's probably necessary to have a successful design sprint.
Okay, so a couple of questions from our people on the call here. One person, Stephanie, I guess, says, so I'm building a new business. I spent a bit long on design to perfectionist tendencies I have been working to overcome. Can
Mhm.
these tools help me speed my design process? And is this a way to socially collaborate with others on design?
Yeah, so that's a good question, good point. This is something that um was actually on my list of fears as well. Something in the past that I've done and we've done, as a team, is you just kind of go back and forth. You have analysis paralysis. You kind of keep iterating on the design, moving the pixels back and forth, um, and just kind of getting your own opinion. I think the biggest advice that I've heard, from the whole lean startup world is get out of the building as soon as possible, and a design sprint definitely gets you there. The question is whether you want to, because you do want to use the design sprint sparingly, because it usually takes a lot of takes a whole week, full days. It takes more than full days. It takes pretty much, you wake up and you go to sleep thinking about the problem and the solution. It takes everything out of you. It's very, very like stressful and
Consuming.
yeah, you're on edge the whole time. So maybe go to the design sprint kit and check out the recipes, see what works best for you. You can always start with a smaller exercise or a couple of exercises, one of the recipes, and kind of go through that. I would definitely say for us, what worked, if you're just trying to cut down on that perfectionism of the design, for us, what worked is, first of all, not worrying about hi-fiing stuff, having high fidelity designs. If the button's ugly, whatever, you can test with the ugly button, and then just pre-scheduling some user tests. I think that's the one thing that you could just extract from design sprint and apply it to your own work. And if you have pre-scheduled user tests, let's say you have at 4 o'clock on a Friday, you have the first user test, then you're going to work really hard.
It will discipline you
Yeah, and the closer you get to that user test, you're going to start very quickly understanding what's important and what's not important, because you're gonna be like, we don't have time for this, let's just.
So your brain will really comply with the deadline.
Yeah, exactly. And we actually, after the design sprint, we actually kept doing that. We kept scheduling user tests, and then just working really, really hard to test as much as possible during those user tests.
Amazing how our brains are really flexible with regards to situation, right?
Right.
So another question I have in the chat is, when you have done these prototypes and these mock-ups, are there cheap or free solutions, Stephanie is asking, for design tests on potential users for the new business or site launch?
Yeah, there's a couple of websites. I mean, pre-COVID, we would actually go to Starbucks. I would go there with my laptop and I would just bother people and be like, hey, can you test this real quick? Right. Obviously, right now it's much harder to do that. But there's websites like usertesting.com.
Yeah, that is mentioned. Andrew mentioned it in the chat. Usertesting.com, right?
We also have used usertesting.com. I think is kind of expensive, especially if you're like bootstrapping yourself. It's like $50 per user session or something like that. You could also obviously ask your friends and family, social network, which can be kind of less preferable because it's might not be your target customers or users. Or you could also, we tried something called MTurk, Mechanical Turk, Amazon Mechanical Turk. We didn't have much success with it, but it's really cheap to hire people for these like small tasks.
Small tasks.
Yeah, and the small task that we would give them would be a usability test.
And also Andrew mentioned, I second that definitely, Prolific.co is an Britain-based company. We worked with them. It's really great, very tailored, very friendly, and not expensive as well. So, and another question, maybe it is the last one, but this is the question where I would like to also hear from the others in the audience. Are there times when design sprint is not a great tool? And I know others like Jeff, I know you, and I don't know, Robert, maybe you have something to say, Stephanie, whether you guys have anything to chime in. Maybe let's first ask Arman, what do you think? And Delphine, and then I would like to hear from others in the audience, what are some other alternative techniques? But let's start with you, Arman. Other times when design sprint is not the best tool.
Yeah, I mean, one example is the scope of the problem, the scope of the challenge. And the scope of the challenge might not be big enough to warrant, important people spending a week in the same room. So you want to use it sparingly, because then next time you try to do a design sprint, people are just gonna, laugh at you and say, we wasted our time. I don't want to waste my time on these small things. So you probably want to use it in cases when it's a strategic thing that comes with, if you don't make the right decisions, then it'll come as a huge price to the company or to yourself. So I think that's probably one deciding factor. Other than that, I can't think of anything else, because I think design sprint can actually be applied not just to product development, but to other use cases as well, like business goals, objectives,
We are
stuff
going
like
to
that.
try it in Princeton Agile to solving our problem, and it is not developing a website. So yeah, we
Right.
will share with you guys later on how it goes. Delphine, do you have anything to say, like other times when design tool is not a great, design sprint is not a great tool? Are there any better options?
Well, I would say that design sprint is really a great tool for all quantitative issues and challenges, as Armin said, so for product development, but also business development in general, distribution channels, etc. Design sprint is not the best tool for qualitative approaches and challenges. As I mentioned in the introduction, cross-functional concepts like innovation or sustainability will probably not be solved because it's not something you can solve. It's something you can address, and since it's an ongoing process, it's something you cannot solve within 3 or 5 days of a design sprint event. In the article I wrote and shared in the PSG CNJ network, and that might have been shared on Mr. Simon website. I'm not sure about that, about forward thinking and innovation, etc. I mentioned a French company which is called Pernod Ricard, and they're all about innovation. That's spirits company, and they're really made innovation the heart and core notion of their strategy. And so they address this through design thinking, because it's something they have to be really focusing on an everyday basis, and that they apply to each and every step of the value chain of the company in accountability, finance, design, the design itself, product development, training, etc. So all cross-functional challenges should be addressed through design thinking.
And we do still have 5 minutes left, and I really want to hear a little bit from the people from some of the people on the call. Jeff, I know with your experience, I wonder what would you say are some other techniques that alternatively can be used from your experience?
Well, first, I just wanted to thank Armin certainly for sharing his expertise. And
Thank you for being here.
What I was wondering, though, just going back a second, was for how applicable it is for, let's say, for a pharma company. And I realize your expertise is in other areas, but again, we talked about, we saw that the deliverable was sort of a working prototype or something that was clickable. If we're talking about, let's say, developing a new drug or something along that line, what would you see as being the deliverable after 3 or 4 days in terms of, you're not necessarily going to have the drug developed, but you realize, I guess, maybe there's a need or a market, or how do we advance this product forward? I'm just curious what you might see as the deliverable in that space.
Right. No, that's good point. So something that I've asked myself after we ended our design sprint was like, okay, what's next? And in the process, I've done a lot of Googling research as to like what the next steps should be. And one interesting article I've read was something where the agency that did the design sprint would actually follow it with what's called a code sprint, where it's not the same thing as agile sprint. It would just be design sprint applied to coding, to technical challenges. And it's not the same thing as medical field, but one thing that the way they approached the code sprint is they would start by looking at risks and de-risking, and something that you're trying to identify in the design sprint. In the code sprint, it would say, what are some things that will prevent us from that will make us fail, basically. And and basically in the process of the design sprint, everyone on the team, all the key stakeholders that need to be there, will be able to come to some conclusions as to, we think that these are the key factors that will prevent us from maybe developing the drug, right? And that could be potentially lack of research in the particular field, lack of funding in the particular field. So it's not going to get you to a drug. You might need to reposition. You might need to change what that definition of validation is in that case. But at the very least, what it helps you to do is identify and focus on the right risks and prioritize them. Probably can be applied to any field.
And I guess along that line, do you find that when you start the process, that there's a need to say, hey, we're just trying to solve too big a problem. We need to cut it down and maybe kick that into another design sprint down the road or something along that point, that we need to reframe,
Right.
We're going too deep. Let's take a step back, or maybe even just, put everything on hold and go back and reframe that initial question, come back in another 2 weeks and then tackle it again. Is that common, or how would you handle something along that line?
Yeah, so I only run one design sprint. So with that data, in my experience, one benefit is that design sprint does drive you from these higher level ambiguous challenges, questions, statements. You tend to naturally, the team tends to get down to more specific type of things. And then or also, as an alternative to that, if they're not specific enough, for example, for us, it was really hard to come up with good sprint questions. We're also kind of they were a little bit too high level, less measurable, less specific. And then that was kind of became apparent when we were trying to validate this with the users. It's not to say it was a fail. It was a huge success for us because because of all the benefits that we've talked about. But then after that, we were able to, we didn't test the sprint questions. We tested the quality of the sprint questions, and we realized that we need to reposition them. So it can still help you in that way.
Right, and I think it goes back to where you were talking about you can't wear multiple hats. You need to have that facilitator is really the one that has to, I guess,
Right.
help with the preparation and the focus to ensure
Yeah.
success during the sprint.
Yeah, and think critically about everything that's on the board, right?
Right. Good. Thanks.
Yeah,
you.
thanks, Jeff. So I also wanted to hear from Robert. Have you ever had experience of analyzing complex problems and getting to the solutions? Have you can you recommend any other practices besides design thinking? What brings you here to this conversation?
Yes, thank you. I thought it was a very good presentation. My background is with large companies. Fortune 500 companies that have had problems every day. As you were going through this, the one experience I had that I was relating to was where we had to come together cross-functionally and implement a brand new accounting process, because we found that there were some areas in accounting that we had not addressed at all. And it started out with human resources was the key. They brought together all the resources, all the vendors, the actuaries, the insurance companies, the HR people, the IT people, the accounting people, all in a room for one day. But they did have a facilitator, and that was the best thing they did, because that person knew that they wanted to put everything into a RACI diagram. So they had an expert in RACI who taught us all, gave us maybe a 20-minute, this is how to do it. We spent a day together, and then everybody dispersed. We worked on it in our own departments, gave everything to the coordinator, and then the coordinator kind of put together the product going through. So, I mean, that worked for us. I don't know how well it would have worked, because all the people in that room would have not have had 5 full days that we could have spent together nonstop. So I'm just trying to think of how I would implement this going forward. The one question I had is, it seems as though you'd make a great facilitator now because you've been through it once. Is this something where the first day of this could be for, within an 8-hour period to do a design sprint, start to finish? I mean, something really easy, really basic, go through all 5 steps, spend 2 hours on each step, and then, maybe leave for a couple of days, give people time to think about it. And then you bring the team together and say, okay, now here's the problem that we really want to solve. Now that you're familiar with, doing the notes, you're a little bit more familiar with the software, you could be a little bit more productive. Because I know for me doing it, I'm not technically savvy. So I'd spend half my time trying to figure out how to get information into all those particular buckets. And I wouldn't spend as much time being as productive in trying to think through all the different issues we might come across and all the different ways we might be able to, address those issues.
Very smart points. Very smart points. Thank you so much.
So in regards to the last point you made about kind of the technology, for example, I think this is where it's really important that you prepare as a facilitator, that you make sure that, okay, if I have people that can't upload something, have trouble doing that, I need to have a contingency for that, where, let's say, if I need people to upload something, maybe I should do it in such a way where they don't need to do it online. They could do it offline later after the during the break or something like that, or where they can reach me over the phone and say, help me do that. That's something I actually did. I sent everyone my phone number and say, if you have any questions, I'm going to sleep at 10 p.m. Before then, call me, text me, email me. I'll help you upload your sketch, and people did reach out to me quite a few times. So that's definitely one thing, is like, definitely prepare contingency plans for everything that can go wrong. In terms of the duration, what the biggest advice that I saw when I was preparing for the design sprint is, do not play around with duration of the design sprint and the duration of the exercises. Just go by the book, especially if it's your first time. I did not listen. And from my experience, I can say that there was definitely places where we rushed, where we shouldn't, where I wish we spent more time on. But you can play around with the way you do it. So we went with a 3-day design sprint instead of 5-day design sprint. And that's something that is kind of, there's some materials about that. So that can be helpful. And then you can play around with, for example, maybe half days, instead of full days dedicating to this. You can do half day Monday, then half day Tuesday. And actually, after, second half of Tuesday and full Wednesday, the whole team doesn't need to be there. So you can accomplish it where, in such a way where, you can put the whole team in the room for one day, and then only part of the team the next 2 days. Or you can also put it in such a way where you put the whole team half of the first day, half of the second day, or something like that. You can play around with the timings. Just I would suggest not playing around with overall duration of the whole thing. But again, the fact that you don't need the whole team there for the whole 3 days is definitely helps in that respect.
And I'm not sure how well this would work in a large corporation, because the companies I've worked in, once you get to a certain point in the organizational chart, it seems as though it's a little more, they make decisions without all of this collaboration. People at a certain level don't want to collaborate. So I was debating whether or not this would be great for an executive team to define the issue as to, we want to get into a new market or a new drug. We know it's going to be a lot of resources. We know we're only going to do this in 5 days. And then to present 20 different subcomponents to go out to the various corporation.
Yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of different case studies out there. That and most of the case studies I've seen actually come from big companies. So Airbnb does this a lot. Google does this a lot. So I definitely would say, that's big companies are using this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe last question. Let's take it from Barbara. And Stephanie, thank you for your questions. I guess you've posted quite a number of them on chat, and I hope we addressed them. So if you guys have any more questions, we will address them separately. Barbara, your question is last.
It wasn't so much a question, but just to add to what we were speaking, well, what you guys were speaking about. And from what you said, Arman, in the beginning, 4 to 7 is really the maximum amount of people suggested for one of these. So if you have a big organization, you're not going to do one design system for the whole organization. It's going to be for the smaller groups and the specific people that can apply to that, I would think.
Yeah, I think it's important that you just have to pick the right people. If you have cross-functional challenge, then you pick maybe key decision makers from those who also have the necessary domain knowledge. And yeah, that's how you probably do it.
So guys, we went over the time limit already. I guess this discussion came to be really interesting. It's more like, it's not like a movie when there is the happy end and the movie is over and you forget about it. It's more like a TV show when everyone is thrilled to know what comes next. So hopefully we will organize a follow-up event at some time. I would love to hear the feedback. It's really interested to turn into this perspective, how it can be implemented in large corporations. I think this is something that we will think about, and we will probably think about organizing another follow-up event, maybe focusing on this particular topic. And there, I would also encourage you guys to think and to think about your own experiences and insights, especially, right? Where we may have this as a more interactive type of event where we will be hearing your experiences and insights as opposed to just hearing to one particular speaker. We will think about it. Let's stay in touch. And Marla, the floor is yours. You are on mute. The best phrase of 2020. You are on mute.
I will just share this if everyone can see my screen. And
Yes,
Natalie, I turn it back to you if you
yeah, a couple of words before we part ways today. How we can continue to stay in touch. Of course, you all can practice with Mr. Simon application. If you have an upcoming job interview, you need to practice to prepare for it. Please feel free, and it is really free. Free means free. Use Mr. Simon to prepare for the upcoming job interview. It's mrsimon.ai. Then if you go to our website, you will also see there are numerous blog articles written, as I mentioned in the beginning, most of them by Stuart with help from Natasha. Some are written by Marla. And Delphine, the one that we have the recording, the article is coming soon. So we will let you guys know when it is out, describing in written all the points we touched upon in the Taking the Leap event, which was about starting your own business. It was also a very interesting event. So this is for Mr. Simon app and blog articles. Also, we would like to stay in closer touch with all of you. And for that, we can meet in either one-on-one sessions with me or with other folks in our network. How it helps is if you need some framework to help you stay motivated and disciplined in your job search, this is one benefit you will get out of this. If you need some help to analyze your fit gap for a position you are trying to apply for and some recommendations, this is another aspect of these sessions. And also one of these is we're focusing on so-called personal brand development. If you want to establish yourself as someone with a knowledge on some particular topic, like Arman, for example. No, none of you probably knew about Arman, but now listening to Arman, listening to Delphine asking these wise questions, you know much better about these two folks. And whenever a job opportunity comes your way, you will remember what Arman is capable of, what Delphine is capable of. So this is part of what we do as personal brand development. Make sure to get in contact with me, with us, if you're interested in any of this. Do we have any contact information here, Marla, on the screen? No?
Not on the screen. Whoops, I didn't mean to do
Maybe
that.
the first slide had the link to Mr. Simon now, had it?
I think, yes, I think it had the link to Mr. Simon. I did put the LinkedIn profile URLs in the chat
Cool.
for Natalie, myself, Arman, and Delphine. But yeah, so there is that information. And was there anything else that you wanted to address, Natalie? Sorry, I didn't mean to abruptly close that screen.
No. You guys, you make
Okay.
sure you save the chat and you will have all that contact information there. Feel free to reach out to me, to Marla. Happy to be in contact.
Excellent. Well, good. I just want to thank Arman and Delphine again. You guys, this was an amazing presentation. So interesting and
Thank you
great
for the
information.
opportunity.
And
Can we all give them a thumbs up?
Yeah.
Well, thank you to all of you.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. For everyone who is on the call, just for your input and everything you shared. This was really, really interesting. And we look forward to seeing you again.